One of the most prominent arguments to defend, so to speak, the single beat metronome theory is the claim that musicians over the course of the 19th century somewhere started to play way slower than, let's say, Beethoven or Czerny indicated. It's a claim that is just an opinion, since there is not a single 19th century line that backs this up. But musicologists of today need to stick to that opinion, since there is no other way for them to explain the extremely fast metronome numbers of Beethoven and contemporaries, tempi that even the earliest acoustical recordings almost never seem to reach. That single beat theory, in case you're new here to the channel, is the assumption to read metronome numbers, roughly said those from Beethoven, Chopin and others, in the same way as we do today. So, one tick equals the note value of the metronome equation. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's called single beat. This view, heavily supported by the academic world of today, has a direct consequence: the refusal to even start to look into the historical ways of measuring time or tempi, where two ticks form a binary unity, like 1, 1, 2, 3, 4. Is that today almost nobody anymore looks into the thousands of tempo indications our beloved composers originally gave for their music. It's one of those things you can reflect on for hours and days even, thinking just how on earth this is possible. In this episode, the closing of a series of 4 on the famous pianist and teacher Isidor Philip, we will see that in his 1891 edition of Clementi's Gradus at Parnassum, he proves exactly the opposite. Tempi did not decrease throughout the 19th century, but instead accelerated, and not by a little. So stay with me a few minutes, since this is an important topic that I would like to present to you with a little bit of context. Once musicians or musicologists descend the stairs of tempi and metronome theory to prove their claims are correct, some argumentation comes to the surface that factually is easy to refute, but yet broadly accepted by the academic world of musicologists. It seems as if many musicians and researchers do see the problem of the hundreds, if not thousands, of problematic metronome numbers, often technically simply impossible, but that they, no matter what, keep their critical eyes closed for true researching this topic, no matter what the consequences are. The obvious consequence is that tempi in the early 19th century were way slower than we believe today, and my feeling is that no musicologist at an academic level wants to be the first to make this statement. A famous argument you hear often also is that those 19th century metronome numbers were in fact never meant to be played. That these musicologists have closed their eyes to debunk something as easy as this claim has huge implications. It has led to a performance practice in which basically all musicians, those connected to the early music movement included, in fact rarely, if ever, even look to the original tempo indications composers gave for their own music. That means directly that you and I have never heard in our entire lives performances of the music we admired played in a way the composers might have done it themselves. That is not Wim Winters who claims this to be true, that's a simple fact. Our choice of tempo affects every single aspect of our performance. Changing tempo is changing everything, including the character of the piece, which for a composer would be a nightmare. If Beethoven asked questions to people who attended concerts with his music, his first and most important question always was, how was the tempo? He even once fulminated that he would leave out the metronome numbers, since no musician paid attention to them anyway. That's another quote completely taken out of context today, reframing it as if even Beethoven did not take his own metronome numbers serious. Even though also that claim is simple to debunk by just looking to the important metronome numbers the master left us after this moment of frustration, we today fear the consequence of it. And the consequence would be to leave our basements and accept the metronome numbers as they are shining silver living objects, surviving time in a way that is remarkable. Take your metronome, put it on 138 and let it tick. You will be hearing exactly the same as Beethoven heard when he metronomized his Hammerklavier Sonata. If you've never given this a serious thought, then imagine this picture of Beethoven, possibly still in his dressing gown, searching the right number on his metronome. A personal gift from Melzel, by the way, to match the tempo in which he was at that moment playing his famous sonata. How cool is that? I mean, how much closer do you want to come to those composers and musicians? It is as if our fingertips reach those of Beethoven. So think about the fact why the musicological world in fact does not want you and me to think for ourselves on this topic too much. Yes, for metronome numbers of Beethoven we at least in theory have some respect, as for those of Chopin, at least on paper, since activate your metronome app on your phone and spend an afternoon on YouTube checking recordings randomly to the composer's own tempo indications and you will be shocked. Now, it's not my purpose and it never will be to convince you to change your playing or listening habits. There's absolutely nothing wrong in playing music by Beethoven or Chopin the way you want, as there is absolutely nothing wrong in listening to the recordings you like, since music is emotion, and as I said before, we have been told our entire lives that if Pollini plays Chopin or Steyr plays Mozart, we hear the voices of the past. So yes, to that sound, even if it turns out to be a 20th century instead of an historical sound, we are emotionally attached. And there's nothing wrong with that. Even if it turns out that Beethoven and Chopin were no Olympic gods as performing musicians, but humans after all, it shouldn't prevent you to keep pushing limits in your own pianistic life to match an abstract point of technical power beyond the horizon. I know many pianists that get their daily energy simply from the idea they will not in this lifetime reach the level that they think is set for them by people like Chopin or Liszt. And I'm not saying this ironically, but serious. And having been in Amsterdam Conservatory for 8 years, I know that attitude, that idea of reaching for the unreachable, driven by a true respect for what almost everyone thoughtlessly accepts to be the standards of the past. That attitude brings out the best in many musicians. Hence the superb, often simply stunning results on the stages of today. Compare what pianists do today to what was common a century ago and you'll see that history is always formed around progress. We don't become worse, we become better, at least in aspects of technical power. That brings us back directly to our point of departure. With all the pianistic power that we have available today, simply look at the Queen Elizabeth competition here in Belgium. It is safe to say that if the historical metronome numbers indeed were to be read as we do today, so in single beat, Beethoven or Chopin outperformed all of those competitors with their fingers in their nose. I'm aware of how ridiculous that claim sounds. It indeed is hard to imagine that if the absolute top pianists of today would go back in history, that Beethoven would technically make them sound like beginners. And yet, if we hold on to our claim that those historical tempo indications are to be read in our modern way, instead of the historical metrical way, yes, then we must conclude that we somehow lost a serious portion of pianistic power that apparently was still available to humans living 2 centuries ago. People claim to play the Hammerklavier Sonata in Beethoven's tempo, but if you check, they actually don't. And to make things a little bit clearer than that, the Hammerklavier is extremely fast in single beat, as is the fugue, by the way, of the same sonata. But Compared to dozens, if not hundreds of etudes written in the same period by the virtuosos of those days, the Hammerklavier suddenly becomes even moderate. Czerny wants you to play 19 notes a second in his daily exercises, with the explicit demand that you end playing according to his metronomic indication. Yes, you as a reader of his preface, not Mr. Alien from Krypton. And don't feel bad about not being able to do this. No living human can, could, or ever will. So what to do with those metronome indications? Accepting the obvious connection to the old terminology of beat, or in German Schlag, leads to a completely new look on our classical music. I demonstrate again. It's simple as what? 1, 2, 3, 4. Being described in the 16th and 17th century times after time. So the musicologists who would officially make that connection, where not one tick represents the note value in the metronome equation, but again the binary unity of 2, he or she would force musicians of today to completely reinvent their performance practice. And honestly, I believe it takes more courage and risk than our present academic world allows. Since yes, one runs into questions or theory, and yes, one runs into questions that might not be always easy to answer. But skipping the silver shining elements of proof, which are the metronome numbers itself, is a risk, or is a thing that we simply would not allow ourselves to do. But yeah, people don't like change. Our croc brain is activated immediately with the question, what will happen if? And certainly also that question pops up in the brains of our musicologists who are thinking on the same tempo issue as we are doing now. Anyway, seeing these incredibly high metronome numbers, at least if read as we do today, an obvious question comes to mind. How come that we today generally play slower, in some cases even much slower? If it were true, it would be the absolute single domain of history in which humanity chooses the path of going slower instead of faster. Certainly in the age of mechanization, an absolute belief in progress, it should raise eyebrows that in the pianistic evolution, and basically in any type of instrument, despite of the bigger, more powerful and stronger pianos that companies kept inventing, musicians somehow mysteriously choose to play slower. Also that pianists over the course of the 19th century mysteriously lost that unique technical capacity, at least according to what musicologists apparently make us believe today, to play in speeds up to 800, 900 or even 1150 notes per minute. What you will see is that of this three-part deduction, namely 1. Original metronome numbers indications are extremely fast, unplayable often. 2. Current tempi of even our greatest virtuosos are slower, sometimes way slower than those metronome indications. And 3. Conclusion, tempi must have been faster 2 centuries ago, and thus music slowed down over the 19th century. That typically the first point is left out. So instead of 3 points, you'll hear only 2. 1. Current tempi of even our greatest virtuosos are slower, sometimes way slower than early 19th century metronome numbers. So, conclusion, tempi must have been faster 2 centuries ago, and thus music slowed down over the 19th century. And suddenly we have the feel that there is a solution for musicians who trust the outcomes of this tempo research, and they don't ask questions anymore. Case closed. We will come back to the subject, since there are lots of 19th century sources covering the period 1820-1900 that make completely the opposite point. But let's stick here to the edition Isidor Philip made in 1891 of the Clementi Gradus at Parnassum. If tempi really became slower throughout the 19th century, he would at maximum not change the original Clementi tempi, who already are extremely high and in many cases simply impossible. But he didn't. he added his own tempo indications. And now the burning question is, are they slower, confirming the academic standpoint of today, or faster? I guess you know the answer by now. Let's have a look together. So of course this one score cannot stand up as a proof for the entire, but it is a rare example of an editor, in this case a world-famous pianist of his time, adding faster tempo indications to the original Clementi ones, and thereby proving the opposite of what musicology today claims to be true. Tempi did not slow down throughout the entire 19th century, they went up. I believe Isidor Philip is an important historical figure, and I guess the last thing has not been said on him. The fact that he confirmed his own tempo indications several times, and that those tempo indications or metronome numbers are only to be understood from the standpoint of the historical metrical reading of the metronome is remarkable, and installs another cornerstone in our tempo research. If you've missed those previous episodes, simply click on the thumbnail over here, or click on the story on Beethoven's 5th Symphony over there. If you liked what you saw and want to see more series like this, becoming a member of our Patreon community would help tremendously. Link below and in the description box. As for now, thanks for watching. See you soon again.